Hello, readers and writers. I'm MJ, and today we're going to be talking about my April wrap up. So, in April, I read a total of 14 books. However, two of those books were a DNF, so completely I read a total of 12 books. All of the books that I read were fiction. I am in the middle of a nonfiction book, but I didn't get it finished in April. The genre that I've read the most in April is young adult, which, if you know me, is fairly surprising because I don't read a lot of young adult books, or I've tended to not read a lot because I just don't relate to them very much. However, there were some books that I wanted to read for representation that were young adult, and then also I'm trying to finish the backlog off of my TBR shelves, and a lot of them are young adult as well. I did not finish any India books this month. I did start several, and I haven't completed them, so I definitely need to prioritize them in May. In total, I read, of the completed books, I've read 5 paper, 5 audiobooks, and 2 ebooks. So the first book I read is Brandon Sanderson's secret novel number 2, and I am not going to be talking about the title because I know there's some people that still want to be surprised when it officially releases. I will say that it is a combination of science fiction and fantasy, and I loved how it blended together. It was definitely, it was definitely a Sanderson works, but different than some of the other things that he has written. Definitely that more playful style. But I think, comparing the secret novels, the second one I think is my favorite so far. I'm very excited to see it when it comes back comes out in hardcover, and I rated it 5 stars. The second book that I read this month is The Restless Dark, and this is a dark fantastical mystery. It's a young adult novel, and it's one that I received in a previous Rainbow Crate box. So it does have sapphic representation in it. I liked it probably a little bit more than I was expecting to. I liked the mystery part of it, which was interesting for me that I enjoyed it. It is about people that meet up for a true crimes camp out, basically trying to find the bones of a serial killer. And they're all there for their own reasons, and it talks about how they come together and then what happens, in this area. So there is a mysterious element to it, like a true crimes element to it, and then also this like fantasy element kind of woven in. And I was enjoying it, but I think it all hinged on the conclusion, and the conclusion just let me down. In my head, I'd come up with so many more fantastic endings to this novel than what actually it was, and so I was a little disappointed by that. But overall, I rated it 3.5. Next, I read On the Edge of Gone. I read this via paper, and this is a book I wanted to read for the autism representation. It is classified as young adult, and I get that, but also I would say that it doesn't have the same young adult vibes as some other YA novels have. I think possibly just because of the autistic rep and having an autistic writer, it was not formalistic, and the main character, I really enjoyed, where I think sometimes YA novels, they can just be a bit much for me. But again, the autism rep was on point, so that's probably why I really related to the novel. So this is a apocalyptic science fiction novel where the main character is I can't remember exactly, but probably about 18 years old, 16, 17, I'm thinking about 17 years old. And so having to deal with the end of the world while being autistic. autism representation is definitely a big part of the novel, but I wouldn't say it's the only part of the novel. So it wasn't just about the main character being autistic, even though that is a huge part about what it was about. I loved this book, rated at 5 stars. I see where all the hype is about. I will be telling everyone to read it, including now. If you even remotely like science fiction, I would definitely read this, specifically for the autism rep. But it also was a great book. Like, it was a great apocalyptic novel. The next book I read is The Queens of Geek, and I read this via audiobook, borrowed it from the library, and it is a young adult novel with autism representation. I thought the autism representation was on point. The book itself, the main characters are from Australia, and they come to basically San Diego Comic-Con, or the fictional version of that. And they're coming for the first time, and it just talks about their interactions, and then the obsessiveness, the autism obsessiveness of the main character, which is not a negative thing. Everyone who's, well, barely everyone who's autistic tends to become very focused on certain things, and so for our main character, it is a book fandom. I really appreciate that, even though you can kind of guess what the fandom was based upon, it's not that, and it never references that, and so I really, really appreciate that. Queen of Geeks also has a queer representation in it. There's bisexual representation, specifically with one of the 3 main characters, and so that was great. It is also very much a young adult novel, and while I loved a lot of the representations, it was just a bit too much for me. The characters were just a little bit too high strung, and just too, oh, it's the end of the world. And it's just not something that I relate to. So for what it is, it's amazing. For me specifically, it was good. And I ended up rating it 4 stars. The next book I read is The Drowned Woods by Emily Lloyd Jones. And this is the very first Illumicrate edition book that I got, so it was one of those ones that I didn't have a choice to get. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, I don't think I'm going to enjoy this. But what I forgot is that I have already read a book by Emily Lloyd Jones, and that is The Bone Houses, and I actually really enjoyed it. So I did decide to give it a shot, and I started it on audiobook, and I was like, oh, I really like this, and so I switched from audio to reading it in paper. I think because the audiobook loan was due, and I just wasn't feeling the audiobook enough to like stick with it that way. I ended up like tearing through this. At first I thought it was like an epic fantasy, and then it kind of turned into like a heist story. So it didn't quite end up being the 5-star read that I wanted it to be, but I still really enjoyed the story, and it's one I'm definitely going to be glad to have on my shelves. I ended up reading it 4 stars, and even though I'm trying to stay away from YA, I definitely think Emily Lloyd Jones is an author that will break that exception. Then, the audio book for loan for The Feeling of Falling in Love came due again, and I'd already listened to half this novel before I had to turn it back into the library, and I wanted to finish the book, but I definitely wanted to wait until I had the audio again to keep reading it. So The Feeling of Falling in Love is a young adult novel with trans representation, queer representation, gender identity representation. It just like kind of that discovering yourself, and it is perfect for what it is. The writing is great. There are so many people out there that need this novel. I probably needed this novel when I was, a young adult. And so I'm really glad it exists. But this book is not for me. I think I don't like books with sex in them anyways, and then when it's even if it's consensual, both minors, I still feel very uncomfortable reading about it. And I don't think it was extremely graphic in the book, but it was enough that it made me uncomfortable. And again, that's a me thing. So not everyone's going to feel the exact same way, and this is one of those books that it's not written for me. And I picked it up anyways, so that's on me. I'm glad I read it. This did actually come in a book box also, I think, Rainbow Crates. It came in that as well. So it would be really great if Rainbow Crate would stop sending YA young adult novels. That would be fantastic. But I don't know. This is one I haven't decided whether I'm going to keep on my shelves just to like show off to people, or if I am going to find it a new home for someone that would appreciate it better than I did. Because it's a great novel, but not for me. I did end up rating it 3.75 stars, just because it was so over the top. In addition to it making me feel uncomfortable, which it did not impact the rating. I thought that the main character was just so horrible that, I mean, I know it was kind of the point, but he was just so dramatic that it was just too much for me to rate any higher than 3.75 stars. The next book I read is Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee, and this is a novella that I got from Nick Kelly in exchange for an honest review. It was not at all what I was expecting. So the book is a fantasy that looks about it's about a person who wants to become basically a falconer, but it's not falcons, it's giant mythical birds. And she wants to fly them to attack other mythical creatures that killed her family. And so it is her story. And that's pretty much what it is. It's very short. It was a little slow. Kept thinking, okay, what else? I mean, overall, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the writing style. It was a unique world. Not at all what I was expecting. And I wish there would have been just a little bit more to it. But I'm not disappointed that I picked it up. So I ended up rating it 4 stars. If you are a Fonda Lee fanatic, then you should absolutely read it. If you really like birds, then you should absolutely read it. If you don't like either of those two, then I would say read the synopsis and see if it intrigues you or not, because it could go either way. So then I picked up The Angel Maker, and this book has been on my TBR shelves taunting me to pick it up, because the publisher sent these little tiny gifts to open up at certain pages, and I wanted to open them. But also, I've been in the mood for a really good thriller, and The Angel Maker it's dark without being graphic, which I appreciate, but definitely still very dark, and it was, for the most part, really well written. I really enjoyed it. I will definitely be checking out more by this author. There's just a few elements that I didn't feel like got closed up. So, like, I just felt like there was loose ends at the end of the novel, and I don't like that, especially on thrillers and mysteries. But it's like, it's the same thing with The Restless Dark. Like, if you're going to add a fantastical element to a book, then you need to, like, address that fantastical element. Now, that's my opinion. Not everyone's going to feel the same thing. But that's what The Angel Maker did. It, like, brought in this fantastical element, but then it's just like, it's just here for the plot. We're not going to actually, like, really address it or close it up or tie it in enough for me to be satisfied. And again, not everyone is going to feel the same way that I do. But overall, I'm glad I read it. And the items that they opened up were extremely disappointing. Two of them were just paper that was like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this now? Recycle it. And then the other was Yeah, it's not spoilers because it's on the cover. The others was a box of matches, which is great. I just thought it was weird. Um, so the little items were a little disappointing, but that's fine because it was really about the book. And this book, the publisher did give it to me unsolicited, and so I really appreciate that, and I'm glad I got to read it. And I would definitely recommend that you read it if you like thrillers. And I will be checking out more of this author's works. Oh, I did end up rating it 4 stars. I did take a star off because I thought that the fantastical element should have been combined in there a little bit more. And some of the other things could have been tied up a little bit better. Like, there's this whole character that they didn't address the ending to, and it really annoyed me. So now we go to the fun part of this blog. I have had Philip Reeves' books on my shelf to read for a while now. I read The Moral Instrument, the very first book in the series, a while ago, and have been kind of putting off picking up the rest of them. But again, trying to clean up my TBR. They're shorter reads, and I wanted to prioritize them. So I read Night Flights, and this is a prequel to the Mortal Instruments series, and it is, a shorter book. And I ended up rating it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's about someone not the main characters of the other book. I thought that she was well described. Her adventures were, they were kind of like a bunch of short stories combined together, and I thought they were very well done. Great world building. But I will be unhauling this book because I'm going to be unhauling the entire series. Because the next book I picked up is Predator's Gold, which is the second book in the series. And I only got about halfway through before it hit a 3-strike, you're out for me rule. And the first strike is that it was talking about America, which America had caused the collapse of civilization, which is fine. But how one of the characters was talking about America was calling them savages that lived in tribes, and it was just oh no, no. And then there was how it talked about women specifically. So the main character has a scar on her face that's kind of the thing, but that's all the main character, that's all that's to her. Whereas the main character guy is does nothing, and yet he's supposed to be this perfect person. And then there is a character that has 5 wives, and I was okay, cool, different relationship representation, that's awesome, except then he goes to call all his wives shrews, and that he can't believe that out of 5 wives, they're all shrews. And then he goes and starts objectifying all the women he meets, and sizing them up to be his next wife, they don't have a choice in the matter, and just it was so gross. Okay, so then we get to the 3rd strike. So there is this royal court on one of the worlds, and there is a servant, a helper, and they are a dwarf, and they used to be the royal dwarf, and one of the main characters what's the point of that? And this person's well, I don't know, I guess being short. And it was just, it was so bad. It was so bad. And it's just wow, this book, no. So I went on, read the reviews, and found that I'm not going to continue I'm not going to like this book. And so then I went and looked into the series further, and I decided that if I'm having problems with this book, I'm probably going to have problems with the rest of the book. So I have decided to unhaul every one of Philip Reeves' books on my shelves, because I just don't want to. Then I picked up Sisters of the Snake, and this is a YA novel I have had on my shelf forever. It's one that didn't specifically sound interesting, but came in a box that was YA-centric, that I'm no longer subscribed to. And I you know, I want to read them. I want to give them a chance. And so I started the audiobook of it, and I didn't get very far into it. I was like, I'm not going to enjoy this. I did not like the narration of it. I was not particularly fond of like where the book was going, and I decided that this book probably isn't for me. So before I DNF'd it, I went and looked at the reviews and decided, yeah, this one's definitely not going to be for me. So I am going to be unhauling this and giving it to a, you know, letting it find a home for someone who will appreciate it for what it is. Then I reread The Girls of Papers and Fire. I did reread this via audiobook. This is the beautiful Illumicrate edition, and I loved this book when I picked it up, but I was reading a lot more YA back then, so I was a little afraid of how it's going to feel when I picked it back up, especially since I have 2 more books to read in the series, and I just invested in this beautiful Illumicrate copies of all of the series. And I am very happy to say that I love this book. It's amazing. It's well written. It's, you know, has some horrible things that happen into it, but that's, sometimes those things just need to be expressed because they do happen. The writing is amazing. The world building is amazing. And, I didn't rate it because I'd rated it before, but that was a 5-star rating, and I'm definitely still very happy with that rating. And I'm very excited to continue on in this series finally. And then for my Star Trek read for the month, I read the very first Star Trek Strange New Worlds book, The High Country. And this was just like reading a Strange New World episode. I think it actually fits perfectly into one of the episodes. I really like that it built on a lot of what we saw in the first season. I think it can be very difficult for authors to have to write characters that are already defined by other people. They have other writers that are creating them, and then they have actors that are playing them. But John Jackson Miller has written a lot of Star Trek novels, so it's not something that he was unfamiliar with the franchise, even though these are probably new characters for him. I ended up rating it 4.5 stars. It lost like half a star just because I thought he could have done a little bit more with the female character. So Uhura is a major part of this book, as well as Una, and I felt like, and then so Captain Pike and Spock, and it kind of felt like when Captain Pike and Spock were there, they were just like presented just a little bit nicer than Uhura and Una, and so I thought there could have been just a little bit more positive female representation in it. Nothing like problematic, nothing like that. I just thought it was a little unbalanced. So I decided to pick up an Agatha Christie novel because I was trying to figure out what to move to next. And instead of going into my TBR, I was like, hey, let's pick up this book. And so I read the second book in this collection, and it's called The Murder of Robert Ackroyd. And as I'm reading it, I was like, this sounds very familiar. Like, I know I haven't read this book, but it's starting to sound like a lot of other Agatha Christie books. And by the end, I no longer felt that way. I was like, this, of all of her books I've read, I was the most blown away by the ending of this one. So, on that regards, well done. However, like most of her books, it does have like colonial superiority presented throughout it. It also has a line that is both racist against Scottish people and anti-Semitic. And it was just this really weird line. The more I've reread Agatha Christie's books, the more I realized exactly how problematic she can be. So that's the last book I finished in April. My favorite books for the month were Brandon Sanderson's secret novel, as well as On the Edge of Gone. I couldn't decide between the two of them which one was my most favorite. For my actual TBR, I failed miserably. I only read 3 of the books on it. I did not get near as many NetGalley arcs done as I would like, and I didn't really read any indie books. So, I didn't do so much with my reading, although I did get a fair bit read. I do plan on revisiting how I'm reading next month and just kind of trying to actually prioritize what I want to get done and figuring out what I want to get done. So there's my wrap up for April. Let me know what you read in the comments, and as always, keep writing, keep reading, and until next time.